Hello and welcome to the Video Creator Show, where we talk the juicy details of how to succeed on YouTube. And what better way to do that than to talk directly to someone who has done it? Today, I'm speaking with Faz Shakir, a political advisor who serves as senior advisor to none other than Bernie Sanders. He is also the executive director of the nonprofit media organization More Perfect Union, which focuses on coverage of the American labor movement, economic policy, and corporate accountability. All of this is to say, Faz seems like a power to the people kind of guy. More Perfect Union has a YouTube channel, which obviously fits very well with this podcast. The channel currently sits at over 140,000 subscribers and over 12 million total channel views, despite having been created just 2 years ago. It features super relevant topics like medical debt, the case for a $20 an hour minimum wage, vaccine price gouging, and the list goes on of things that are plaguing the American people. Before we get into all of that fascinating stuff, the Video Creator Show is brought to you by VidChops.com, an editing service that helps take the burden of editing off your back. Check out VidChops.com to see how you can save yourself tons of time and energy while taking your YouTube channel to the next level. Faz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Grant. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So to start, obviously you've had a successful political career, and now you have this media organization, More Perfect Union. I think this is particularly interesting because a lot of the people I talk to on here, they're kind of just like a one-man show on YouTube, but this is more of a company that you have built and is doing very well. And it covers so many important topics that are relevant to so many Americans. So can you talk about what went into creating More Perfect Union and kind of like, first of all, what was your motivation? I'm sure it was to spread a message to help people and kind of cover topics that are often ignored by a lot of media. But yeah, what was your mindset in starting this endeavor?
Well, there are two major inspirations here. One is Bernie Sanders, of course. Having managed the campaign, we had our own media critique. As you might know, we felt often that this plight and the stories of what affected working class people around the country were not often covered because they didn't fit into the political horse race coverage that many media like to report on. And rather, I sat with that critique. We made that critique during the campaign. After the campaign, I felt like, why not try to suit up and do something about it? Why not offer the media the way in which we thought coverage of working class people could or should go, and test whether there is an audience for that. Turns out, Grant, thankfully there is. If you do this, the media critique that, well, it's boring, it's not interesting, people won't respond to it is wrong. When you're talking about labor coverage around the country, you're talking about people organizing the workplace, you're talking about people fighting for basic health insurance, the high cost of prescription drugs. Those things are deeply resonant when you explain to people how it's affecting them and what they can do about it. The second major inspiration for the organization More Perfect Union was, back in my history, I had founded and helped run a progressive blog back in the days when blogs were the thing. In 2005, 2006, it was called Think Progress. And it was affiliated with the Center for American Progress. And we did fact-based, research-based reporting rather than opining and opinionating as much. And that model governs the style and the format of More Perfect Union. Rather than to sit and be preachy about the things that we believe, we want to share with you and reveal facts and information and help you draw your own conclusions about the type of society we deserve to have. I would say related to that question is this idea that we would be faceless, like to the extent that we're going to promote a name or a voice or a face of More Perfect Union. It would be the face of workers. It would be the face of directly impacted people. And we were launching More Perfect Union. I was told by many people that you can't succeed in a YouTube environment that way. You have to be personality driven in this day and age. You have to build it around somebody that people can associate with. And I think we've met in the middle a little bit on that, Grant. We've both identified our brand as not actually around, myself or any of the other editors who help run the organization. It's not about us. It's about the people we cover. That said, we work with a lot of YouTube collaborators who built successful channels in their own right, whether they're Brian Tyler Cohen or Crystal Ball or Second Thought or a number of others who, teamed up to do video projects that are often initiated by us. So we're meeting, I think, somewhere in the middle on that.
Hmm. And this is proof that you can be a media company on YouTube, or a media organization rather, because I think the personality aspect of YouTube is important, and I like what you said about meeting in the middle there. So you don't necessarily have to have one face. You can have a few faces, or even just kind of relevant, interesting stories that are pertinent to what is happening in the world, and that is absolutely a relevant way to run a successful channel. So I'm kind of curious about your background as well. So you have Think Progress, that kind of, it seemed like that was sort of the initial, the early stages of your kind of online presence, so to speak. Um, and then you obviously have your political career. So I think with starting a company on YouTube, like how long did it take for you to kind of build up the clarity and confidence and information to start something like this? Because this seems like a big undertaking.
Well,
Yeah.
right. Well, the distinction with Think Progress back in the day is, I mentioned we were bloggers. We were writing written content, the modern incarnations of, say, Substack or Medium, right? Postings. And I think that, we also at that time started to try to do video, and we're one of the first major blogs to start to incorporate, video clips and work with some those who have long histories know that, blogs like Crooks and Liars and others were, and Raw Story, were doing video at the same time, and we were learning, about the value of introducing, early YouTube videos, really at the launch of YouTube itself, integrating it in with blogs. So it's been in my head as compelling content, and has obviously existed for, decades here. So it wasn't novel that we would just create videos. We were video-based journalism here, at More Perfect Union. The idea was that in this day and age, when we're talking about populist content that resonates with working class people, our view from an ideological perspective was that it would be far more persuasive politically to move people, to help educate people, if it was done in video form. If you're talking about the plight of working class people and the suffering of, let's say, stagnant wages, or not being able to organize their workplace, it's one thing to write it down on a piece of paper and say, "Yeah, here's a clip," or "Here's a quote from, a worker at a work site." That's been done for obviously ages. What hasn't been done as much is the idea of, like, showing you the face. Here's the person down in Bessemer, Alabama, person or persons who are organizing their Amazon warehouse, and let them tell you their story of why they're doing it. Let them show you their passion, essentially. And I think that the video component of that is far more politically useful for persuasion than the written form. And that was the idea at launch. That was the first thing we covered, actually, was the Amazon organizing down in Bessemer, Alabama in February 2021. And since then, for the better part of 2 years, we've covered all kinds of workers in all different kinds of capacities, telling you their stories. If they're working Dollar General, what are they going through? Here's a tornado that ripped through our facility, and the company didn't care, and I lost, a family member as a result. Those kinds of things, they really stick with you, but particularly through the video format. And it remains our competitive advantage that while there are a lot of labor journalists out there who cover a lot of things affiliated with labor, often we're the ones providing you the visual form.
And that is so important, to have that kind of boots on the ground journalism where you are talking to actual people instead of just a face in a studio, right? It feels so much more real and relevant. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is kind of the process of running an organization on YouTube. So you release quite a lot of content. Like, what goes into a video? Like, how long does it take from start to finish for a video? How many people are involved in More Perfect Union? What is the workflow like for running an organization?
We have a very talented team of a lot of people at different roles, all of whom do them very well. About 25-person organization. So you have some obviously doing operations work, but if you think about the content, you have a couple of major streams at the top, one being a news side and another being a kind of explainer op-ed side. That explainer op-ed side is what we call the classroom. It does longer form, uh, YouTube friendly videos that are built around a thesis of finding key facts or information about a interesting topic that you wanted to delve into for a long period of time, but no one really did. So, how did Elon Musk get rich? How did this one family get rich from controlling California's water supply? How can we break up Ticketmaster and why we should? Right? These are kind of questions that we've delved into in the classroom that take 10 minutes plus in length, and have done quite well over the last year. The news side is more covering, as you can imagine, the daily flow of events that have tangible news hooks. So if you are organizing your workplace, that's obviously a relevant, campaign, and we're covering it from the moment you launch to the end of its conclusion, with video being the preferred method in which we communicate about your campaign. Also, if there's political races going on, we're going to cover those on the news side. If there's corporate wrongdoing, let's say Southwest is, screwing over its consumers and its passengers, then we're going to cover that on the news side. So in the course of the year, you probably have the stats in front of you better than I do, but we've had probably over 450 original videos published on YouTube. So it's a very active channel, and on any given week, you're going to see, lots of videos be uploaded. We're increasingly getting into vertical videos as well, both publishing on TikTok, but also on YouTube, and we've seen, getting rewarded for that format as well.
So what has the short form content been like for you? So publishing on TikTok, you have YouTube Shorts. Do you feel like because there's sort of an argument with that format where it can be kind of for short attention spans, or you're not able to get your message across properly? Do you feel like it's gotten your channel a lot of attention and people have kind of spilled into the longer form content? Or do you feel like with YouTube Shorts and TikTok, you are able to get a message across? It's just maybe more concise, and it's made you be more precise with the words that you choose.
Yeah, I think that the behaviors and obviously the algorithms of each of these platforms are rewarding certain things over others. So if you go to TikTok, it has felt like in our view, the social media platform that's most rewarding of organic reach and growth, in a way that it was hard to crack YouTube for a long period of time. It was actually the hardest one for us. Had to invest a little bit. We didn't spend a ton of dollars, but a little bit of dollars, and doing some advertising there to just try to get over the hump of your first 10K or 20K subscribers. I think we got rewarded, at least on YouTube, from our perspective, and I welcome other people who've been on this platform and know far better than I do. It's just that, the idea was to do these theses that were revelatory, that have a long arc to them, right? Essentially are evergreen. So if you wanted to know, how does private equity screw you over as a consumer or a business? Well, we're going to have a 10-15 minute explainer on private equity, and it may not hit in the first weeks of it, but that's a video, for instance, that's now well over 400, 500,000 views on YouTube, but
Right.
and had its moment largely months after we had published it. So what I see in YouTube is the opportunity to really kind of build your library and your collection, such that there's hopefully ideally going to be moments. Whereas TikTok to me is like it's far more in the daily flow. You hit with a short that's relevant, on point, on timely, and it kind of goes or it doesn't. But from our experience, those are tighter with whether they have success or not. Whereas YouTube, you could have success, 6 months later.
I think that is a valuable perspective where the short form content is like you can really hit trends hard and easily because, I mean, they're much easier to make. They're so short and simple. But there's still a place for evergreen, relevant, important content. And not that shorts aren't necessarily important, but kind of as you were talking about, you can go more in depth, obviously, with long form content. So I think there has been a lot of conversation lately about, is long form content going away? I don't think so. I think actually long form content is becoming a place for what maybe it was always meant to be, where you go into detail and then you can make shorts for getting attention and kind of hitting more bite sized topics. And that I think is good. I think allows people to kind of shift their focus according to what is most relevant. You know, is this a fast, digestible news story, or is this a kind of detailed, more research intensive kind of topic that is still going to be relevant 5 years later? And yeah, it seems you've hit both very well.
We're trying, and obviously I have a lot to learn. I mean, I think, Grant, hearing you speak, you're also thinking about the gateways into which how people might access that content.
Yes.
And so while you think about people potentially bookmarking a YouTube video when they have 15 minutes to go sit down and really research it, that might be one way in which people, say, hey, that sounds interesting. I don't have time for it right now. Let me hold on to this one. Ideally, they would, but really, what it really creates a responsibility on our part to also make sure we are advertising and re-advertising the videos in moments where it could be more relevant. So if we did a story about, let's say, how Elon Musk got rich, like when he's in the news, we're using our other social platforms. Say, hey, let me remind you that we have done this longer form video that might be relevant to you. In addition to that, we have an active email list of over 200,000 people that we've now built up over the course of a year and a half. And so that's another form of just making sure we can get into people's inboxes that way. So and as I mentioned before, occasionally having a few dollars to do some paid advertising. So you look at all of these gateways in, and you say, okay, if we got a long form explainer that could potentially be interesting to people, you're really just waiting and seizing on moments when it might be ripe for a
Mm.
broader conversation, and then hopefully pulling all of the various levers you might have to get people to know that you have that content.
Right. So you make a video that's going to be relevant for a long time, and then you advertise it when it's especially pertinent to your email list with paid advertisements. That makes a lot of sense. So I am curious. Like I have sort of a twofold question here. I think advertising is something. Excuse me. I think advertising is something that doesn't get talked about a lot on YouTube, even though paid ads are everywhere. Obviously, you click on most videos, there's a skippable ad in the beginning, maybe two. So, first, I'm curious, how did you build your email list? And then, second, how did you go about running paid advertisements for More Perfect Union?
So the email list, let me start there because we had a desire right at the jump to, like More Perfect Union, do a kind of a different style of video than others. We also did an email list that's very different than others. So while many of you, might see email lists that really, if you subscribe to them, you're either getting inundated with fundraising asks, which is a common email, usage, or it's a newsletter of some kind, and it's filled with some information. So we do a bit of a different thing. We started an email activism, as we call it, that an activist list, which is to say each of the emails is going to be built with an action asking you to either write a letter or contact somebody or something. Oftentimes, let's say a corporate CEO, let's say the head of Starbucks or the Starbucks board, asking them to stop their union busting, for instance, or Amazon, to stop their union busting. So we'll kind of load up the contacts of those various board members, or in the midst of the Southwest meltdown, load up the Southwest board and say, the CEO should be fired for their malpractice during the Christmas holidays. And then we give people an opportunity to contact those corporate leaders directly into their inboxes, and
Mm.
that has been the try, both what our mission and our purpose is to have corporate accountability, some degree of corporate accountability, to give people a road into it, and obviously gives us a way to advertise the video. So oftentimes when you're taking that action, the video is there, right there, to watch and to play or to understand that particular issue. So that's the email list. And on the other front, of paid ads, it's been a trial and error process. I'm not sure I have really great solutions or suggestions for people to how best to use their dollars. I would say that, as I mentioned to you, I, was on Bernie Sanders' campaign, managed that campaign. We did advertising there on a whole host of platforms, YouTube being one of them as well. And the way most political races and campaigns advertises the way you talked about, pre-roll or skippable, content at the beginning, whether 5, 15 seconds, whatever it might be at the front. And what we've been trying to do is advertise in a different way to reach people. It's a different concept, right, Grant? We're not talking about trying to get somebody to donate to More Perfect. You were trying to get somebody who'd be a subscriber, somebody who's going to
Right.
stick with us over a long haul. And ideally, you're getting into the discovery or some forms of finding people who are interested as a community in this kind of content. And we're prioritizing the subscribe as the outcome rather than an action or a dollar or any other action. We'd rather get that subscriber. And the cost per subscribers is it's really hard to get. Honestly, it's been one of the harder platforms to advertise on.
Right. Yeah. Ad campaigns on YouTube. I have a lot of potential clients that kind of reach out to me. They're interested in making ad campaigns, and I always have advice for them, but it can be very hit or miss. I tend to tell people make a channel trailer, advertise that trailer. People can click on it, and then they'll be able to check out your channel and decide if it's for them, as opposed to kind of advertising one video and then you get all these people spilling into the video and most of them are going to click off and then kill the watch time on the video. So that's kind of my general advice for using ad campaigns on YouTube. It seems to work well. It's all about like what kind of product you're delivering. So my next question for you is, obviously you've had a full career here, and it seems like over the years you've had a mission statement, so to speak, where you're trying to give a voice to kind of everyday people, the American labor movements, and you're highlighting things that are legitimately important as opposed to kind of creating this theater or drama about a story that is going to sell well or big really fast, but it's just sort of, I mean, it's BS, right? So you've stuck to your guns, so to speak, over the years, it seems. And what advice do you have for doing that? Because you've worked with Bernie Sanders and you've kind of been in and around Washington. I'm sure there was kind of a vortex that you could have gotten sucked into, but you didn't. And in doing that, you eventually were able to create More Perfect Union and kind of succeed on YouTube, and it's going well for you. So, what advice do you have for kind of sticking with your values, even if the going is rough?
It's never easy, Grant. I mean, you have your own values in life, and far be it from me to try to tell people what their values should be. I can only relate my own and urge people, to think about it from their own perspective and try to persuade. By nature and by my entire life, I've been both governed by a desire to be a persuader and say, appreciate that people are coming from different walks, have different points of view, might be opposed to my own, but I want to I want to both understand people who disagree and think about a tone and a format and a style that speaks to them in ways that might find us commonalities. I've always gotten into politics from the jump based off of an assumption that politics is immoral and unjust. I'll be honest
Mm-hmm.
with you. That's where I
Mm-hmm.
come from. And instead of thinking that it's immoral and unjust and this is some garbage and bullshit, and I'm not going to be involved with it, it's what propels me to be involved in it. I think if not because it is unjust, I must stay engaged in it. And to grapple with if it's unjust, like what are the reasons that are causing it, how best to change the system. And from my perspective, one of the ways in which the system is, most corrupt is that obviously money influences a great deal and power influence, established power influences a great deal, such that the voices of regular people are far minimalized and not as critical to their process. I therefore ran a Bernie Sanders campaign in which we working people right front and center, right? It said, hey, there's really kind of a fight against established power and wealth, and to solicit $20 donations from millions of people across the country, be small dollar funded, speak to the agenda and issues that mattered most in their lives. And if you can both build monetarily that kind of format and have the agenda that speaks to them, I think you find that it resonates. It truly does resonate if as long as you keep the compass and the values of what you're trying to do. Are you truly willing to take on power? Because that's what people are going to say. That's what they're responding to. You're taking on power. And when you're taking on power, Grant, it comes with friction. People are going to get upset. They are going to be annoyed. And so you have to merge that with what I was talking about the front end. It's like we're going to take on power, but we're doing so in a persuasive way. We're trying to suggest that there's better ways to reorient an American economy that works for most people. Right now, it does. It doesn't. That's not the way our American economy is oriented. It works for a few people at the very top. We want one that works for all of us. And so those kinds of fights endure and endure some friction. And I embrace that friction. That's what makes for the interesting YouTube videos. That's what it makes for the interesting content. But I want that tone and format to not be conspiratorial. I'm not here to try to like suggest, the blow up an idea just to like make it interesting for millions of views. I want to persuade you. I want you to see and grapple with both the unjustness of the system and ideally us pointing you towards a way in which to improve that system. They say, hey,
Mhm.
either whether it's through taxation, regulation, state action, organizing your workplace, whatever the solutions might be. My view has been that when we start getting in there, you talk about rail workers or something not having paid sick leave. When you start thinking about these economic justice issues, my sense has been they're like 65, 75, 80% support. These are things that cross ideological lines, they cross partisan lines. This is where you can get, these unlikely coalitions, particularly in a partisan age, if you stay true to what you're trying to speak to. It's a very populist working class orientation for the economy that doesn't get spoken to a lot in the traditional media. And if you do it right and you take on and embrace the fight against power, and engage that friction, my sense has been that you will get rewarded with regular people saying, yeah, that speaks to me. And I will say, Grant, we're only 2 years into this year, less than 2 years, but I've been pleased to see that real people around the country signing up and saying, yeah, regardless of my partisan stripes, my ideology, or, whether being I'm a Trump supporter, Bernie supporter, Biden supporter, whatever, this speaks to me. This is the kind of economy that I want to see run.
Beautiful. So, with your clear objective here and kind of giving a voice to people and to unions, when you have this clear vision of what you want, I think taking that and then translating it into reality. So, in this case, a YouTube channel. What advice do you have for making that work? Because in the day-to-day process of running a YouTube channel, as we both know, there's so many moving parts. It can be easy to kind of lose track of that vision day to day. Maybe certain videos get made and you look at them and you're like, there's something off about this, but do I have time to correct it? Like, if we don't release a video, is this going to be a problem? And then you can end up releasing it anyway. Obviously, I'm not saying you do this, but this is something that I think happens in a lot of media companies where they almost don't have time to have values, so to speak. So what? How do you maintain this in the kind of day-to-day, mundane, complicated reality of running a company? And what advice do you have for kind of keeping your head clear through all of that?
I can only speak to my own experience here on this in this regard because I would say I'm entering into an ecosystem in which I knew and understood that we were trying to be additive, be different than what might have already existed prior to us. And we're going to own the fact that we are advocacy journalists, right? Journalism with an advocacy lens. That means to the extent that we have a bias, we know and believe that we have certain values that we advocate for, but when we advocate for them, we're going to report them accurately. So if we're going to support the workers who are organizing the Amazon warehouse, we're going to tell that story
Mhm.
accurately, but have a bias towards in favor of them. And so we own that right at the top. And
Mm-hmm.
so to your point now, when you think about what is our strategic advantage? What is it that we're bringing to the space? It is that. It is, in my view, the clear thesis of that has both a moral and just lens into it about why you should care, why this issue is important. Clear thesis on the matter, right? Whatever it might be. These Amazon workers deserve a union for the following reasons, right? And own it. Right there, I think we got a clear thesis, and then I got very talented video editors and producers around me who help think about. We both take a lot of time on a script, and spend really thinking about after we've shot footage. So we both before we shoot the footage, having a good sense of what we want, what kinds of shots, both B-roll and direct, that we're looking for, and thinking about after we get that footage in, scripting that in interesting and compelling ways that get to the thesis. So if we had the thesis right at the jump before we ever got involved in this video, we now know, okay, we were trying to argue that Amazon workers deserve a union because, let's say in one case, during COVID, many workers died or were forced out, had to work overtime hours and never saw their wages increase. The
Hmm.
clear thesis, and now they deserve a seat at the table. Now, as we went and did our interviews with workers and pulled relevant facts and research, we're building right off that thesis, right? We're saying, okay, what's kind of makes this compelling and interesting, and ideally we got footage shot that also helped it reinforce it. So I say that, Grant, to say, at least for us in our perspective, that clear voice of advocacy journalists right at the top of having a thesis of with a point of view governed by facts and information is it, right? That's it for us. Whereas I see a lot of traditional media feeling like feeling hesitant to have a clear thesis. So if you looked at the, headline of video, like what are you trying to say? Like what is the point? Why am I trying to watch this? You will not have that concern with us, right? You're going to have a thesis that's going to be clear in the video headline. It's going to be clear in the thumbnail, and and ideally, we know what we're trying to do there is trying to say, hey, if you want to watch this video, engage with a point of view and some research and information that's revelatory.
Hmm. I like that idea of owning your bias and being upfront about it and just kind of sticking to it in as reasonable a way as possible. Because I agree, there's a lot of kind of media companies, I won't name names, but it's almost like they are pretending that they're not biased and that
Right.
they are the arbiters of truth and everything they say is correct. And there's like a sort of insidiousness about that. Whereas if you own your bias and you're kind of upfront about it, then you can kind of put together a compelling story that is it's clear what is going on here, and the
Uh,
viewer, I think, feels respected as well.
a word on that. I think it's the most honest form of journalism. Again,
Mm,
my point of view, my perspective, because you've told your readers right up front, here's what I believe, and then assess me and judge me by the whether we reported the facts out accurately. Yes, yeah, I want to be challenged on that front, but I'm doing this reporting because I believe in these issues, and that's I think it's the most honest form. Another thing I would say is that any media journalist out there, any media publication, you think about why people go and read your content. It is because the editors of that publication have decided what should or should not be on that site. So when I go to the New York Times, you go to the New York Times, all we're reading is what the editors have decided are valuable stories for us to consume. Right?
mm,
And that is their editorial perspective. They said, as a quote unquote paper of record, these are the stories that we think are important. And they try to be as broad as they can. Obviously, a large, newsroom, so they can cover a lot of different things. So they're not as constrained by bandwidth, but they are still making judgments, right? Here's things that we think are important. And from my perspective, I'm like, that's fine. Like own it. That's what you're doing. If you're CNN, you're wherever you are, your editor, your management is deciding that these are the stories of importance and interest on a given day. And that is what people are coming to the site to read and consume. And it means that your role is particularly important to hold great responsibility with that and to say, yeah, I own that. That yeah, we're going to have an editorial lens and a perspective that is going to draw people in. I want to share that editorial lens very clearly with them. Whereas, most traditional media would say, hey, our editorial lens is very, you know, uh, emotionless and doesn't take sides, detached from these stories. And in that way, I think does a disservice in this day and age to kind of tell the readers and the viewers, give them a point of view about why things matter. And you see this starting to shift even within mainstream media, where if you go to, like, let's say CNN, some half the stories will be analysis, right? So basically a perspective of now diving in, which means that traditional media is now giving us more quote unquote their perspectives. To my mind, it's losing what is most important about traditional media, which is relevant and interesting facts that have been uncovered, right?
mhm.
It becomes that this form of analysis or punditry on cable TV becomes the easiest cost wise to do, right? Here's a perspective, here's a point of view, here's the da da da. And as you say, Grant, it's so you're already invested now. It's telling people that you have a point of view vis-a-vis the people you picked. So why not own an editorial bias? But also, if you're traditional media with that kind of bandwidth and resources, why are you not out there just uncovering new key facts about people's plight on the ground. That's my biggest concern is like all the content that we've been covering, let's say, Kellogg's workers organizing or, and why they're doing so, they still don't get covered in the press. It's not of interest to them. They have the bandwidth and resources to do it. It's just not of interest to them.
Hmm. And I feel like one reason you've been able to successfully operate from the bias of working people in this case is because of the way you seem to be monetizing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you get a lot of revenue from just donations.
Yes.
And it's you're not getting these big corporate sponsors, which obviously is one valid way to monetize on YouTube. But the problem there obviously is you're not getting direct support from your audience. A lot of people maybe use Patreon for this. For you, you have a donation space on your website. So by doing this, it seems like you're kind of able to keep reporting from the perspective that you have, whereas maybe somebody who is running a more traditional media company, they feel this kind of pressure to be a chameleon, like
Right.
they can be as vague as possible about what they actually stand for so that anybody who has deep pockets that wants to advertise, they can just say, oh no, we totally support what you're doing, but it's not it's more about the money than about the perspective. I mean, is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. And obviously we try to also solicit funding from people who are ideologically aligned and care about this kind of content. You see it actually on the right a lot. I think I would argue the right has built up a YouTube presence in a bigger way with more influence, at least from my
Hmm.
perspective. And you think of the Ben Shapiro's of the world, the PragerU's, the Crowders. There's
Sure.
a bunch of them who've just kind of really got million plus type numbers, and really have invested in an ideological space. Again, it's different from us because we're not trying to do the opinion side of it. I would say the corollary on the left would be people like Young Turks or Crystal Ball who do more opinion related left versus right. We're trying to do uh, first person factual presentations of information and stories from the ground directly or compelling new novel research. And on that score, it's obviously more akin to traditional journalism. I don't see that happening as much on the right. Obviously, the right has built up a large ecosystem around. There might be like maybe a Daily Call or somebody that does a little bit, or Free Beacon, or does a little bit of reporting there. But for the most part, I see the traffic on the right being rewarded, like the old Rush Limbaugh days, around interesting punditry and commentary. But that said, I see a larger, a community there, ideologically there, that the left has not quite yet caught up to.
Hmm. And why do you think that is? And it seems you're right. I mean, the Rush Limbaugh days, the right seems to always kind of have this punditry, and it works. But why is the left? Why does it seem like they are more? They rely more on organizations or kind of
Yes.
faceless companies. Like, what is that? What is going on there?
There's a lot to diagnose about that. I would say that one of the things that might be compelling that might be other people might not say is how populism of the left is not as highly regarded in elite levels, whereas
Hmm.
populism of the right, I think, is more highly regarded at elite levels. So you think of a Donald Trump style movement, you
Hmm.
see most established politicians of the right until maybe the recent days, where they want to figure out ways to court those kinds of supports, think about how to appeal to them, talk to them. Whereas you think of Bernie having built one of the most, strongest progressive left populist movements in recent, and done it twice, right? Two major progressive presidential campaigns, and yet you don't see, an establishment Democratic Party trying to say, hey, how do we kind of court that and to speak to these people? How do we as well turn into kind of good populists of building that? And I think there's something there in the DNA of really a left versus the right that the left is not and has whether through has not through donations through organizational building architectural construction thought about constructing itself as populist, right? As from the grassroots up. And even you think of the
Mhm.
Democratic Party, it's largely a fundraising vehicle. It's not something to think about as a service oriented organization or activist oriented or organizations. And I think that hurts. On the right, you have more civic alignment. You have people who are part of gun clubs or churches
Mhm.
or homeschool associations, whatever it might be, that culturally bonds them, but also builds in kind of grassrootsness or populism of the right that then I think translates into the audiences that are also going to watch some of this content that we're talking about. On the left, I say to you, Grant, like where's the civic organizations? Where's the populism? Where are people speaking to? That's why I care so much about unions. I think unions are one of those ways in which you bring people together across race and gender and class divides and say, hey, here's where we talk about some of these progressive issues of healthcare and prescription drug pricing, or your wages. And that could be a way in which you start to build, a populism that then, would, I think, translate into a shaping a party, shaping content, having people speak to that and get audience for it. But it's missing. It's missing. I
Mhm.
mean, I think Bernie was unique and an iconoclast, and kind of revealed for many Democrats, oh, that's what, we should, that's for me was, why don't we construct our campaigns like this, right? There was a fleeting moment in time, I thought, where Obama, obviously built something in 2007, 2008 that had a populist flavor to it, and then kind of evaporated over time. But Bernie's is the most kind of sustained movement style approach. And as a result, you're on YouTube, you see that type of content, that type of ideology is also rewarded because there's actual people there. Whereas I think an establishment view doesn't have actual people associated with it, which matters. I mean, you can win a presidential election or whatever that way, but I'd prefer to do both, right? Not just say, hey, we're against the right and its excesses, and we're trying to be good, competent bureaucrats and run a government appropriately as Biden is trying to do, but also speak to emotionally the hunger and the anger and the desire of real people.
Mhm. So, as far as starting a YouTube channel, let's say somebody is listening and they lean politically left. They have a lot of strong opinions. They're well informed, and you kind of highlighted this problem of it's almost a cultural way that things exist right now, where people on the right they tend to be form communities better. I mean, you mentioned kind of gun clubs, even churches, whereas the left I maybe people that lean politically left are they live in bigger cities, life is faster paced, and maybe they just kind of don't think about forming these communities as much. So there is this kind of fundamental problem where it's harder to have big individual personalities on the left that do well. But let's say there's somebody who wants to start a channel and they're left leaning, and obviously, there are personalities that do this, like Kyle Kalinske. Is that his name
Hmm.
of Secular
Right.
Talk? Like he
Yes.
he seems to do pretty well, but he's also not exactly at Rush Limbaugh's height of fame, or even I mean Tucker Carlson. Obviously, like he's on Fox News, but he still is like a big individual personality. So, like, do you have any advice, perhaps, that somebody could use to maybe sidestep or shift around this sort of cultural issue on the left to build a presence around either them or an organization or something that is more personal than a sort of faceless organization?
Yeah, I think, this is obviously take my advice for what it's worth. I do still do believe that social media in its best forms, and particularly YouTube in its best form, is a place that can and will reward you for interesting revelation and insight. And I would say if you're launching the channel to try to do branding, or because you find it entertaining, I would argue maybe there's better things to do with your time. I, I
Sure.
I would
Yeah.
I would say it's think about what perspectives or insights or revelations you feel like you have that are unique, that are compelling. And the wonders and the beauty of YouTube is that you can find communities that want that insight. And I think you correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, and you feel the same way, but I think you could still build community around interesting perspectives that have not been actually told, that most media do not care about, that come from your own knowledge and experience. People are trying. We live in days and age in a day and age where we are a bit more siloed off from each other post COVID, especially a lot less social interactions in our more online interactions than in-person interactions. And so I do think that because we're missing the kind of old school social camaraderie that makes us human, the desire to connect with one another, I think people seek and want it online. Like what to tell,
Mhm.
can I connect with you? Do you know and understand something about my own life and help me understand it better? And if you can do it in a compelling and interesting way, I continue to think there's a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, and we're sort of getting towards the end of our time here, but I wanted to hit more on this idea of a kind of grassroots YouTube channel. So a lot of YouTubers will do this with Patreon. In your case, again, as we talked about, you get a lot of donations kind of through your website. But do you have any kind of further detailed advice on building an audience like that? Because it's so important to be able to get direct donations from your audience so that you can stick to what you actually want to do instead of, I think money is so like it can slowly kind of corrupt the core of a company or a channel because like the day to day can be so difficult if you aren't getting paid enough and you're putting all this time into something. It can be easy to kind of let things slide towards where you never wanted them to be. So as far as getting direct donations from viewers and your audience, like, do you have any further advice on that? I think your email list is very important. The
Yeah.
way that you've set it up is good. For instance, when people click on your website, they're immediately prompted like, "Hey, would you like to join our email list?" But it's also easy to click away from if they're not interested. So it's not intrusive, but it's there. So yeah, what further advice do you have for that?
Well, in addition to all the things that you just mentioned that we do, it's also trying to hook up with, collaborators who have established platforms. And when you're doing that, I think, Grant, you really kind of know that a lot of these people are going to get hit up by a lot of folks, and understandably so. So it's important that you probably enter into this knowing that at the beginning you're trying to build up your channel and probably not getting financial reward for it, at least at the outset. You're playing for the long haul a bit here. And I'll tell you from our perspective, first 6 months on YouTube were just grueling. I mean, we just like,
Mhm.
you remember the first few videos, like, man, can we get over 100 views on this? It'll be great. And even now, 5,000 views on something, right? Much better than what it used to be, but we're growing and growing and growing. It's a slog, and you're building it up. But I think as you go out and speak to others and you try to form those collaborative relationships, I think one of the things they're asking is one, have you built an established record? Is there content out there so that you're not a fleeting thing? You're not, that's what everyone would worry about. You're just, you're here for what, two or three videos and out, or are you going to be around? Are you going to be somebody who's investing in this with a perspective and a point of view such that you have credibility and a brand associated with whatever it is that you're trying to establish. So, both an established library of some kind and looking at that a steady pace and cadence of performance so that both advertisers know that there's that, but also collaborators know that this looks to be something that isn't a short-term deal, but rather something that could be around and makes a partnership more valuable.
Right. It and as far as mindset is concerned, it sounds like patience is a big word there. Patience and consistency are kind of two words that
Yes.
get thrown around a lot with starting a YouTube channel and succeeding. And I talked to kind of one of my friends who has been working on YouTube full time for many years and doing well at it. He compares starting a YouTube channel to starting a fire. You build a campfire, right? There's kindling, there's logs, and at some point you get a spark, And if you built it correctly, then the spark will ignite the fire and it will last. So building up this backlog as you guys have, it seems like it was that was the way to do it. Like you mentioned, only getting a few hundred views a video for a long time, but then eventually, I'm sure you had videos that just took off. And then
Yes.
suddenly you're getting all this attention, and then people are spilling into those old videos, and they were evergreen content. And it's just a matter of time before the fire ignites if you're building it correctly.
Yeah, and that's it. Is that ultimately I mean, I appreciate that people are going to try to chase the titles or something that they think might get the most utility of a click, and there's parts that are absolutely right. You know, think about like playing around with titles and thumbnails and those kinds of things, have descriptions, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't do it at the sake of what brand you were trying to establish for yourself, because you know, then the reward for a particular video being highly viewed, it's not going to be lasting for the channel, because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
that's what you're trying to do, is you want to be you want the channel to grow, and if you want the channel to grow, having consistency around not only publishing but the presentation of how you publish, like, you know, I think is vital. So when that moment hits, and you know, I know I remember the first video we did was of a Frito-Lay worker who had been electrocuted on the job and didn't get fair workers' comp despite it. And we told a story, millions of views right off and it hit in a big way, and it did not see it coming. But the good thing about it is when it did, when it did hit and all that came, the videos around it were complementary to it. Right? So if you liked that one, you were probably going to find, you know, a series of others that, you know, were similarly of interest to you, and so it was affirming in that way, rather than, oh, that one was a complete outlier, and now, you know, all those views that came in don't accrue back in a sustained way to the channel. That's not what you want.
Hmm. Yeah, right on. I think that's a perfect note to end on here. It's all of that is so important for building a channel, kind of being patient, and you never know when an opportunity and just what you're doing is going to align with what is happening in the world, and you know your moment will come and things will really start working out. So, Faz, thank you so much for joining me. I've really loved talking to you about more perfect union, kind of what we talked about with your career as well. All of this has been really fascinating. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it, Graham.
Yeah, and again, the channel is More Perfect Union. You can find it on YouTube. There's also perfectunion.us is the website. Go check it out. You will not be disappointed. And yeah, thanks again. That's a wrap.